Hi, my name is Erin Huang. Thank you for joining me again to learn more about the Alexander technique for musicians. In the last video, we talked about how our body is our first instrument and how the quality of our coordination has a direct impact on how we sound. Today, we're going to apply some of the ideas we talked about in the first video to our practice session, rehearsal, and performance. So if you haven't watched it, make sure you have watched the first video before you watch this one. So before we move on, here is a quick recap of what we did in the first video. We did the turtle to explore our dynamic range of movement. We also did the baby fist with the wrist and arm to explore the dynamic relationship of our head, neck, and torso. We also explore the idea of our body being three-dimensional, moving in three-dimensional space. I want to take a moment to talk about the reason why we did the movements in the first video. These movements serve two purposes. One is to bring awareness to our body and to wake up our kinesthetic sense. Two is to help us understand how we move. Why is that important? Well, in order to play more freely, we need to be able to identify any excessive tension in our body so that we can change it. For a person who's used to playing with that excessive tension, they might not notice it. So by practicing self-awareness and observing what's going on in our body, even when we're not practicing, over time we can start to notice when we're in a contracted state and when we're not. For example, some may start to notice that they tend to tighten their body before a very difficult passage. When we start to notice our habitual response to a stimulus, in this case, a difficult passage, then we can choose to react to it in a different way, a way that offers more freedom in our body and to achieve our goal more efficiently. This is the Alexander technique process. So another reason why injury happens is that oftentimes we have the wrong idea of how our body is designed for movement. For example, in the last video, we identified where our head meets the neck, which is much higher than we normally think it is. So I want you to explore again, moving from that top joint, moving your head in different direction, and try moving it where a lot of people think where it is, which is the jawline, and notice any difference. Usually, if we start moving and initiate movement from that top joint and not from the jawline, we will notice less tension in our neck. Another place of misconception is the lumbar spine and our hip joint. A lot of people bend over, hinging at their lumbar spine and not their hip joint, where this is a more movable joint. Usually we can change our quality of movement simply by having the right body mapping in our head. This is the reason why these movements are very useful before you approach your instrument. They help us to remind ourselves how our body naturally wants to move. Actually, it's a really good idea to try to do these movements and think about the ideas that we talked about in the first video in your daily life. Because how we do anything is how we do everything. How we stand and sit normally is no different than how we stand and sit when we're with our instrument. How we're holding our toothbrush is no different than holding our instruments. So the more awareness that we can bring to our daily life, the easier it will be for us to approach our instrument. The walk with awareness that I mentioned in the last video is also a great way to practice self-awareness and spatial awareness. You can simply pick one idea from the first video and ask yourself if you can notice that on a walk. Here are some questions you can ask yourself. I wonder what would happen if I release the tension in my neck. I wonder what would happen if I sense myself as a whole body. I wonder what would happen if I sense my three-dimensional self in a three-dimensional space. Make sure that it's coming from a place of wonder and curiosity. Any of these movements are not a rigid type of movement that you have to do it right. It's a way for our body to learn and explore the possibility of movement and freedom in our body. So be creative and have fun and see what you notice. Now let's talk about ideas that can help us pick up our instrument. I'm using a mug here instead of my instrument, so it's easier for you to see. Before we try to reach for our instrument, we want to do a quick scan of our body, making sure that we're still sensing ourselves as a whole, that our head is connected to our neck, to our spine, and to our legs and our arms, that we have front and back and sides, and we have depth. And there are space around us. We have front space, back space, side space, space above us and underneath us. Sensing the support of your feet on the floor and support from the chair under your sits bone. Our sits bones are the two rockers underneath our pelvis. You can simply by putting your hands under or sit on your hands and feeling that two pointy parts. That's your sits bone. So here we are, we're simply just looking at our instrument, noticing the space between the instrument and us, and while still sensing the support of the floor underneath our feet. We're still whole body. Now I'm going to simply allow my finger to travel through that space while I'm still sensing the support of the floor. So I'm reaching, leading with my fingertips towards the instrument. As I make contact, I want to remind myself again of I'm still whole body, that my feet are still supported, that I can still sensing my feet on the floor and my sits bone on the chair. Simply we're going to take it to us and return to center. Feel free to pause at any time and try different ways. Try the way that I was suggesting and also try the way that you used to pick up your instrument and see if you notice anything. Our goal is to still sensing our whole body while picking up our instrument. A lot of time when people just reach in and grab their instrument, they lost the contact, the sensation of their legs and the sensation of the support of the floor, or even sometimes the support of the chair. So pause at any time and play around the idea and try a couple more times and see what you notice. Now I'm going to share a few ideas that can help us to hold our instrument with less tension. Do you remember the baby fist we did in the first video? How we curl our hands, our fingers towards the center of our palm and simply wrap our hand, our thumb around it to create a baby fist. The idea of the baby fist is not from tightening and shortening. As you can see, my hand now is grabbing in, and then see if you can notice the tension in my fist. But rather, I'm allowing my fingers to lengthen all the way and starting movement there. So it's a lengthening motion rather than a shortening. So the same idea applies to how we hold our instrument. So again, if we allowed our fingertips to lengthen towards our instrument and lengthen and take its shape, and just take a moment to notice the quality of movement. And we can simply let go and notice how it's really different than if I'm grabbing on my instrument. So if I'm applying by shortening my fingers to try to grab on my instrument, I'm noticing more tension in my arms and in my body. And if I'm thinking about lengthening through my fingertips, and even imagine that my fingertips and my instrument becomes one, then I'm simply holding and supporting the weight of my instrument with my whole body rather than just my hands. So again, you feel free to pause and try different ways of grabbing it. If you feel that you're gonna drop your instrument, you can practice with a mug or a toothbrush and get a sense of what I mean by grabbing it by shortening. I hope you can see in the video, or lengthening, and see which contact is fuller, it's firmer. That do we need to squeeze on holding our instrument, or we can simply lengthen our fingertips and allow our whole body to support our instrument. See what you notice. So now we're ready to bring our instrument to us. Take a moment to remind ourselves that we're still whole body connected with our feet on the floor and sits bone on the chair. And remember, we talked about how our fingertips lengthen towards our instrument. And now our instrument is becoming a part of our hands. So simply we're going to pick it up by leading with our fingertips. And notice how if I'm leading with my fingertips by bringing up my instrument this way, I am not shortening and going towards my instrument. So I'm going to turn sideways so you can see better what I mean by that. So if I'm sensing, again, my whole self being connected, feet on the floor, sits on the chair, and really sensing that my fingertips are lengthening towards my instrument. If I'm leading with my fingertips, simply bring up my instrument to me. I'm not distorting my torso. Whereas if a lot of time you'll see people do this, that they go to their instrument rather than bring their instrument to them. Do you see that now I'm shortening my torso? And there is a tension in that shortening that's happening. So I want you to pause at any time and explore the idea of bring up your instrument by leading with your fingertips versus going towards the instrument, and see where your habit is. Even if we notice that our habit is not an efficient way to move, don't be afraid of it. We can always change the way by thinking differently by using the ideas we talk about in this video. Our habit is a great way to inform us where we are, and from there we can direct ourselves to a more efficient way to move with more ease and freedom. Next, we're going to talk about a few things that we can do in performance or rehearsal when we feel that we're a little stiff, that we need to find that freedom in our body again.